So then in 1968 you recorded, you mentioned it earlier, your first solo project, which was Score, and I'm a proud owner of a vinyl copy and the reissue on CD, and it is a great record. And it's interesting. So did Horace's impact lead you to making that first record, and what kind of got you going in that direction as a solo artist?
Well, it was Horace was in there, but I had also joined the Duke Pearson big band during that early period. I forget how Duke got my name, but Marvin was also in that band. Maybe that was part of it, or I'd been playing with Clark's band and he heard me. And that was more of a working band than CT's band or a lot of the other stuff. Not that we made a lot of bread, but we had a pretty regular gig at the Half Note. And at one point, Duke was also a producer for Blue Note in Solid State, so he asked me to record. And I had just started writing some tunes, and I had also formed a relationship with the great Hal Galper, who played with me at a regular gig I had. It's a whole long story, but a club called L'Intrigue, which was a front for a gay club upstairs. But I had a steady gig for about 6 months playing whatever I wanted in the lounge downstairs. It was the front for the club upstairs, which was a big secret. And Hal, who I had heard playing with Phil Woods, played that gig, and I was kind of writing some tunes for that gig, and he was writing some tunes, so I utilized his expertise in helping me and kind of with this first record. So I wrote half the tunes, and he wrote the other half. And half of it was kind of jazz and kind of folksy melody, and the other half was more funk-oriented, using Bernard Purdie and the great Chuck Rainey, who I had done sessions with, and whom Duke Pearson had never heard of, because so this was a new area for him.
And then following that time period, I guess it was after Horace, then you joined Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers,
briefly.
and clearly one of the most important groups in jazz history. And what was your relationship like with Art?
Well, that was a thrill. He was going through one of his greatest periods. I'm trying to think. Well, this was after Horace broke up the band. I stayed with Horace for a year and a half, and in California he wanted to take a break, or he had some reason, but he told us that he was going to break up the band for a while. So I came back to New York, and somehow Art got my name, and I started playing with him pretty regularly at Slugs. With Carlos Garnett was the saxophonist. Different piano players. Joanne Burkeen was there for a while. A bass player named Skip Crumby. But I hadn't really devoted myself to writing yet, so as much as I should have, or else I probably would have taken more advantage of this situation. We were mostly doing some of Carlos Garnett's tunes and the classic Art Blakey tunes, Moanin' and Night in Tunisia and stuff that I had all the records of. So I stayed with him off and on for about a year, but like I said, it was really on and off. And in the off periods, Mike had moved to New York and had met Barry Rogers, the great trombonist, who in turn had a relationship and was talking to two singer-songwriters whose names were Jeff Kent and Doug Lubon, who had a bunch of kind of rock and folk-oriented open tunes, I guess. And they wanted to put a horn band together. And Billy and I were more or less freelancing around New York after Horace broke up the band. So Mike told me about this situation. Would you think Billy would want to try this band? So we just, in our free time, got together, and it just kind of clicked immediately because the tunes were very open. And we just started to rehearse. It just clicked. Billy was such an amazing, literally developed that style of drumming. With Horace, he just utilized the normal set of drums. He had been in the Army previous to his gig with Horace, but he also grew up in drum and bugle corps. So he had amazing chops. And in fact, in Horace's band, we always used to have to say, Billy, like, kind of play a little softer, and he'd play soft for about 10 seconds. But with electric band, he could play as loud as he wanted. So we started rehearsing, and that was my exit from Art Blakey, because the last gig, you know, he's famous for these stories, but we went to a club in Washington, D.C., and never got paid. Last night he just drove back to New York. We got stranded there. And then I didn't hear from him for weeks. And in the interim, long enough that we started forming this other band. In fact, we had attained a record deal with Columbia Records. We got well known enough to have a steady gig at the Village Gate. We were kind of the house band. So Clive Davis came down and heard us one night and signed us to Columbia Records. Anyway, to make a long story short, all of a sudden I get a call months later from Art Blakey, who says, "Hey, it's Art, we're leaving for Tokyo tomorrow." And I had given him my passport months earlier, mentioned a tour of Japan or Korea months, and then I never heard from him. So I said, "Look, man, I haven't heard from you for like 5 months, and you didn't pay the last gig, so I can't. I'm involved in another situation where I'm recording with another band now, so I can't go." We had a big fight over the phone. We eventually patched it up, and I think he got Hino to play in Japan. But later on we'd laugh about it, but that was like kind of typical jazz story. But in the interim, I was leaving for, that's why I remember this really clearly, for Chicago, where we were going to record with this new band, Dreams. And we did the first Dreams record at a studio. I don't know why, I forget the reason why we went to Chicago instead of New York, but I guess they had a good deal with a studio they owned out there. And that record came out great. That was really an innovative band.
Yeah, absolutely. That band seemed to have a real point on the direction of fusion, and the fact that, I mean, the horn section too with you and Mike and Barry, it was really spectacular.
Yeah, it was unique.
The entire band too, and I believe that's when Will Lee moved up to New York to be a part of that band.
Yeah.
Is that what got him
eventually,
up there?
well, first of all, what made the band unique, just so the readers know, we didn't write anything down. What separated the band from Blood, Sweat, and Tears, which was really the intent, was not to have arrangements. So we obviously needed horn parts, and the horn parts evolved. It sounds amazing when you say it now, because there's not that much chance to rehearse, but we rehearsed every day. We weren't doing anything else. We'd just go to Baggy's rehearsal studios. We had managers, and they set up everything. We'd show up, and we would just jam up the tunes every day, play them over and over, tape everything on cassettes had just come out. And the arrangements all slowly evolved from just playing stuff over and over, and they're really amazing, I think. I just heard both records a couple of weeks ago. Just the spirit with which the horns played, and Barry's harmony notes. He was amazing at thinking up parts, because he did all the arranging for Eddie Palmieri. He was more experienced than me and Mike. But this was the first time Mike and I really got to play together, and we were just all three of us on the same wavelength. So if you can find those records on iTunes, or they're around now, you should really check them out, because it's some special stuff.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so around that time, you also, I guess, began getting very busy as a studio musician here in New York, and this would be maybe late 60s, early 70s.
Well, it was early 70s, like I said, and then we decided to hire another bass player and keyboard player. And Jeff and Doug were great songwriters, but especially Barry was kind of the de facto band leader. I still don't know if we made the right decision. The second record's very good too, but we ended up getting Don Grolnick to replace Jeff, and eventually Will Lee replace Doug. For a while, Chuck Rainey was actually in the band, and that was some live. I have some live cassettes. It was just and killing, you know. But Will came up to audition when he was 17, and he sounded just great. He got the gig in about 10 seconds. He also sang great. So
yeah, right.
So, and I don't think he never went home. And we became known kind of as a unit, with having this steady gig at the Village Gate. On weekends, a lot of contractors came down, just people in the studio scene, because people heard about the band. And we just kind of became known as a horn unit, and Will and Don, not so much Billy, but they became known as kind of a unit. They had another band with Chris Parker. They all lived in the same building, which eventually evolved into the Brecker Brothers band, Steve Kahn.
Great. Well, that leads me into my next question, which I could sit here all day and listen to you talk about it, but the Brecker Brothers, certainly one of the most important bands in jazz and fusion, and for my money, one of my all-time favorite bands in any style of music. Just incredible writing, incredible playing, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, you were writing a lot up to that point, but it seemed like at that point your writing really came to the forefront, and your compositional talents really came out in this amazing way. Can you just talk as much as you'd like about how the Brecker Brothers formed, the relationship you and Mike had in terms of direction of the band, your writing for the band? It's just such an important band. We'd just love to hear all your thoughts about it.
Well, it's interesting how one thing leads to another. That's what the kind of the moral of the story is. When I was 15, 1962. I went to Stan Kenton band camp at Indiana University, which led me going there for college because I liked the school and the surrounding. And at that camp that summer was Grolnick, Keith Jarrett, Dave Sanborn was there. We became fast friends. Lou Marini was also there, but I didn't know Lou that well. A guy named Mitch Farber. But Dave and I had a natural affinity because I liked R&B, and he had the Dave Sanborn thing even at 15. So we stayed friends. He went to Northwestern, and I would see him every year at the Notre Dame Jazz Festival. He won a big prize, the best soloist of the festival in 1 year. And by 1973 or 74, and then he played with Paul Butterfield when I was with Blood, Sweat and Tears, so we'd hang out. He was living in Woodstock. I'd go up there and play. And the impetus behind the idea of the Brecker Brothers was Mike had come to town, and Sanborn was living close by, and I thought, this would be really a hell of a horn section, because those two guys are coming from really an original place. So I started to write with that in mind, for the two of them, with the intent of doing a Randy Brecker solo record, actually. And we rehearsed steadily at Don Grolnick, Will Lee, that living on an apartment building on Carmine Street. Chris Parker and Steve Kahn were also, I think, in the building. I know Chris was, and Steve lived around the corner or something. So we had what was kind of, there were a lot of rehearsal big bands around town. We kind of had a rehearsal funk band. Grolnick was writing stuff, Steve was writing stuff, and I was writing stuff. With really not so much an intent to do anything in particular. I just wanted to write, and I thought it sounded great, the three horns. Like I said, with the intent of eventually do a demo, and I try to do a solo record. And we've been playing also, Mike and I, with Billy Cobham for after he hit big. He left Dreams, went with Mahavishnu. They hit it really big, and then Billy reformed Spectrum and had me and Mike in the band. So we were all during this time period playing with Billy professionally, along with doing studio work. Anyway, I got a call one day from a guy named Steve Becker, and had a meeting with him, who said that he had just signed a production deal with Clive Davis and Bell Records. Bell Records was going to change their name to Arista Records, and he had heard about this music I had been writing, and kind of filtered through the grapevine, I guess, because we've been rehearsing for several months, and I was just getting ready to do a demo for my Randy Brecker solo CD. And he said, you know, if you call this band the Brecker Brothers, I'll sign you. And at first I said, well, no, I wanted to be, this is supposed to be a solo record, and there's Dave Sanborn, so these 3 horns are the front line, so it'll look kind of funny if you call it Brecker Brothers, and he's standing there. Nobody knew who Dave was really at the time, or other than, well, people did it through Paul Butterfield. But I thought about it for a couple days, and he was calling me, and it was such a nice opportunity. I didn't want to pass it up, so I kind of begrudgingly said, and it sounded good. Nobody had ever really thought of Brecker Brothers, even though we've been playing together for years. I mean, we hadn't thought of it. You know, I remember reading Brothers Brecker once somewhere, but just nobody had thought of the name. So I said, call it Brecker Brothers. So we went in the studio and recorded everything under that name, and I got Harvey Mason to come in, who I had played with briefly when he was going to Berkeley, and then I heard him with Herbie Hancock, and I thought he was just great, so I thought we'd have him play, and Ralph McDonald, who was a close friend, played percussion, and then the core of the band, Chris Parker played drums, and Bob Mann played guitar, and Grolnick, me, Will, and Sanborn.
Yeah, so amazing. And you have a personal favorite of the Brecker Brothers records you guys did?
Oh, gee, well, they're all, you know, as a band, I love Back to Back because everyone contributed, and by then it had developed into more of a band concept, you know, because everyone was busy, and, you know, I didn't want just, you know, I was kind of the de facto leader. Mike hadn't developed yet into being a writer. He was playing, and he didn't want to be bothered with a lot of stuff. So Grolnick and I used to take care of a lot of the business, but we tried to involve the band, so there's a lot of really good spontaneous things happened on the second record, Back to Back, and also Heavy Metal Bebop with Terry Bozzio, and it's a live record with Neil Jason and Barry Finnerty, recorded at my father's place. And then Neil wrote a tune called East River, and we spent months recording that tune, which I thought was great, and that became kind of a hit in Europe. Yeah, pretty big hit in the UK. So I like that record, and the last record, Strap Hangin', has a lot of good playing on it too.
Then you guys took a 10-year hiatus, and then I remember in 1992, the Return of the Brecker Brothers came out, and to me that's a fantastic record, and your writing on that and playing is spectacular. I don't know if you remember, but in 1995 I was out on tour with the Stones, and we got to hear you guys in Tokyo, and for my money, one of the best concerts I've ever been to. You and Mike just sounded like it was not a note that wasn't just perfect, but it must have felt nice to reunite after all that time for those last 2 records.
It was great. You know, we hadn't intended to take a 10-year hiatus. It's just it was supposed to be temporary, but we got busy, and we started families, and Mike. We had the club, 7th Avenue South. We could talk about that later. And Mike had slowly started playing with Mike Maneri with a band that evolved into being Steps and Steps Ahead. And he wanted to kind of play acoustically for a while, and that left open a spot in Jocko's band because he kind of left. So Jocko called me to take his place, and I did that for a couple years. And I started doing solo projects, and just one thing led to another. The next thing you know, it's 10 years later, and we haven't played together. So. Yeah. We decided to reform the thing again.
Well, we as fans, we are all glad you did. Those are also great records.